Good evening. This is our sixth summer Los Alamos Forum. Nelson Hoffman is retired from a career as a physicist at Los Alamos National Laboratory. He worked most recently in the Plasma Theory and Applications Group of the Computational Physics Division. He earned a BA in Physics from Rice University, and in 1970, a PhD in Astronomy from the University of Wisconsin in 1974. 70 BS, 74 PhD, 4 years for a PhD. That's pretty amazing. Anyway, yes. His research interests are mainly in the areas of laser fusion and plasma physics, transport in plasmas, gamma-ray diagnostics of fusion experiments, and statistical inference, that is, machine learning applied to data analysis. He has authored or co-authored more than 90 technical publications, which have garnered more than 3,200 citations. He is a member of First United Methodist Church of Los Alamos and is active in the Keros prison ministry. He is a founding member and past president of Los Alamos Faith and Science Forum, and he's been influenced by the writings on the history of science and culture by Toby Huff, Lawrence Principi, James Hannum, David Lindbergh, Joseph Henrich, and many others. He believes it is highly likely that without the critical influence of Christianity in human cultural history, modern science would not even exist. Thank you. Let's welcome Nels.
Thank you, Kurt. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. My topic is the genes and culture of Adam, the first human, or the first humans, cultural stasis and hominin extinctions. Once there were many hominin species. I'll tell you what a hominin is, but now there's only us. What happened? In Genesis we read, "Then the Lord God formed a man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being." I don't know what mental image you have stimulated by that scripture. Maybe it's something like this. Maybe you picture a man bursting up from the ground in a matter of a few seconds. Or maybe you picture over a period of many millions of years, a human appearing created out of the very particles that make up the planet Earth. But Genesis tells us this story. We can look at other faith traditions. We can look at the Hindu texts. In the Hindu religion, the Puranas are a collection of sacred writings, and they describe the creation of the first man and woman. The four-faced Brahma, on being born, produced from his mind Svayambhuva Manu and his wife Shatarupa, the embodiment of all virtues. For this very reason, Svayambhuva Manu has been known as the mind-born son of Brahma. So the Hindu text emphasizes that humans appeared from the mind of God, as if we share the consciousness that God has somehow. Perhaps that's related to the notion of being created in the image of God, which is the Judeo-Christian scriptural tradition. Now I'm going to turn from religious texts attempting to deal with this very important question of who we are and where we came from. That's what these texts are about. But I'm going to look at now the scientific record. And we will discuss tonight what we can learn from paleontology, archaeology, anthropology, and the story those disciplines tell about the first humans. And then we'll come back at the end of the talk to consider the religious point of view once again. Now, I've organized tonight's talk in the following way. I want to tell you about three mysteries of human origins, or you could say three puzzles, or three big questions about human origins. And then I want to look at new evidence we now have from the DNA of ancient humans, and then formulate a hypothesis. So here are the three mysteries I want to tell you about. There's the mystery of the vanishing others, the mystery of the long cultural stasis. A stasis is a period of time where nothing changes. It's static. It's a stasis. And then finally, the mystery of the journey into the cold. So let's look at these mysteries one by one. The vanishing others. You may be aware that in 1856, unusual fossils were discovered in the Kleinefeldhofer Grotte cave in the Neander Valley near Düsseldorf, Germany. These fossils were similar to other fossils that had been discovered in the past. They were at first assumed to be the skull of a cave bear or some kind of human being. They were analyzed by a scientist, Hermann Schaffhausen, who published his description of these fossils. Schaffhausen, a few years before, had suggested that species were not immortal, that the species, the biological species, have, just like the life of an individual, a beginning, a time of flourishing, and a period of decline, albeit over much longer time intervals. He didn't actually propose that the species evolve into new species. Darwin would publish his book on the origin of species 6 years later in 1859. But he was thinking about the species in this way. By 1864, then, it was proposed that these bones came from a distinct species, Homo neanderthalensis, so Neanderthal. We now know, and because of discoveries made over the intervening 170 years since this discovery, that there were many other species walking the earth in the past. In fact, there was a time when many other human or human-like species walked the earth simultaneously with us, with Homo sapiens. Here are a few examples. Here is another skull of Neanderthal from France. Neanderthal tends to have a longer skull than we do, with the brain set more behind the eyes rather than above the eyes, as in the case of Homo sapiens. Here's Homo erectus, Homo heidelbergensis, which is believed to be the predecessor of both Neanderthal and Homo sapiens. This article from Scientific American in 2000 says, "We were not alone." And in fact, you can look at a record of these fossil species that have been discovered. Here is a plot with time running down the left-hand axis, 1 million years ago, 2 million years, going down to 7 million years ago. And you see the various fossils that have been discovered. Here's Homo sapiens, Neanderthal, heidelbergensis. Here's Homo erectus, Homo habilis. Hominins, these are all hominins. Hominins are primates who walk on 2 feet. Chimpanzees and gorillas do not generally walk on 2 feet, and they are not included as hominins. They are called hominids with a D, okay? But hominins are walk upright on 2 feet and tend to have large brains. which I'll describe a bit more about in a minute. Here are the Australopithecines. Maybe you have heard of Lucy. That's Australopithecus afarensis. Here's Lucy over here. So these are the hominins, and you can see, look at this, about a million, well, let's look at 1 million years ago, there were 1, 2, 3, 2 million years ago, maybe 6 hominin species simultaneously populating the earth. Now, as they say, hominins have large brains. Here's what that means. This is a plot of brain volume, endocranial volume, the volume of the skull. You know, you have to have an entire fossil skull in order to be able to do this. There are about 170 known skulls, and their volumes have been measured, and they're plotted as a function of time from 7 million years ago, here on the left-hand side, to today, here on the right-hand side. And this is the brain volume of some of these Australopithecines back here, about the same size as a chimpanzee. So the Australopithecus was kind of like a chimpanzee, except it walked on 2 feet. And then about 2 million years ago, brain volume just takes off. It's rising exponentially. Here we are today, Homo sapiens. Neanderthal had brains about the same size as we do. Here's Heidelbergensis, Homo erectus, Homo habilis. So this is an unusual feature of hominins. You know, tiger brains didn't do this. Chimpanzee brains, gorilla brains, they didn't do this. They're the same size brains as they were 7 million years ago. But for some reason, and in fact, there are many good reasons why this probably happened, which we won't go into tonight, but there are very likely strong evolutionary forces that would drive an increase in brain size, having to do with larger social organization and social structure like that. Yes, Gary?
No, this is very good. Can you comment on how complete you think that record is?
Let's get to that later. Gary, please remember to ask me that at the end of the talk. Today, all these hominins are gone, though. Here's a chart from National Geographic, February of this year, showing time runs across the top now. Here's the present day over here on the right. And the various species are shown in a diagram, looks kind of like a riverbed of many braided streams. Look here, this is about 300,000 years ago, showing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 species simultaneously on Earth. And then suddenly, it's just us. So, this raises a question, and I'll call this then the mystery of the vanishing others. If big brains are such a great advantage, where is everybody? Maybe you could call this the Fermi paradox of human origins. Okay, we heard from Chick and Joyce last week about the Fermi paradox of extraterrestrial life. If life is so easy and so common in the universe, where is everybody? Where are all the extraterrestrials? Well, you can ask a question like that here in the context of human origins. And if big brains are not a great advantage, then why did brain size increase so dramatically? So this is the mystery of the vanishing others. Let's look now at the second mystery, the mystery of the long cultural stasis. The Middle Stone Age was the period from 300,000 years ago to 50,000 years ago. So this is kind of just that last little bit of the plot of brain size increase. The first Homo sapiens probably appeared in Africa about 300,000 years ago and made stone tools of a variety of shapes and sizes. Here are some examples of what look like spear points, maybe a hand axe. A hand axe is a sharpened stone, but you just hold it in your hand to scrape meat off bones, probably the big application of a hand axe. The early Homo sapiens resembled Neanderthal in many ways. Their tools were similar, and In fact, the brain shapes, the skulls of those early Homo sapiens were a little bit elongated, not as much as Neanderthal, but somewhat similar. There were ornaments during the Middle Stone Age. Here are marine shells, seashells, okay, that have been dug up in archaeological sites, maybe hundreds of kilometers from the ocean, even where the ocean was 300,000 years ago. So they've been transported long distances, and they're perforated as if they had been strung together on a necklace. So during the Middle Stone Age, there were ornaments like this. And ostrich shells, perhaps ostrich shells were used to transport water over long distances. You know, an ostrich shell is pretty big. You could hold water in it. But here's the interesting thing, the puzzle. The first Homo sapiens tools and ornaments didn't change for 250,000 years. Now, you and I live at a time when darn big changes happen over 500 years, 1,000 years. How different was life 1,000 years ago? It's changed a lot, hasn't it? But not back in the Middle Stone Age. Material culture, that is the culture we can now dig up in archaeological digs, it hardly changed during the Middle Stone Age, except, one big except, it seems that material culture sometimes vanished. So these authors, writing in 2023, Sherry and Will, say that the archaeological record appears to be peppered with the appearance, disappearance, and reinvention of key technological and social innovations. It's as if culture flickers on and off. That's their term, flickering. And they base this on the record in Africa, and of course, all of these Homo species are now known to have originated in Africa. There are many archaeological sites all around Africa, and so this diagram shows a time axis rising vertically out of the map, running from 300,000 years ago to about 30,000 years at the top. And these bars show when a given kind of archaeological specimen, and we're talking about hand axes, you know, blades, sharp blades, hafting. The purple bar shows hafting means the ability to tie a spear point onto a shaft. It's not trivial. I mean, go home and try it. It's not trivial to figure out how to fasten that spear point to the spear, and the ability to do that, sometimes appears at an archaeological site, and then it goes away for tens of thousands of years. They don't find any evidence of that going on. It's as if people forgot how to do these various things. Some of these other bars show long distance transport. You know, when you find a rock, it's easy chemically to identify the source of that rock, in some geological site. And so you can tell when rocks have been carried long distances. And so archaeologists can figure out that yes, long distance is going on, long distance transport is going on, and then it just stops for some reason, for tens of thousands of years. So this kind of stasis, except for the flickering on and off, characterizes the Middle Stone Age for 250,000 years. Uh-oh. Okay, now, I wanted to find what culture is. We'll sometimes use the word culture to refer to a population that created a certain kind of tool. Culture is a word meaning beliefs, practices, technologies, and social norms which have to be learned from other people. You are not born knowing what your culture is, right? You weren't born knowing how to speak English, okay? If you'd been born in Japan, you might have learned how to speak Japanese, of course. You're well aware. So you have a predisposition to learn a culture, But you're not born with that culture. That culture has to be learned. It's this extensive accumulation of shared, learned knowledge and technology. So, the question is, can culture be forgotten? That's what it looks like is going on in Africa for 250,000 years. Among all hominin species, everybody. Remember, it's not extinctional, it's not transmitted genetically, you have to learn it. As I say, it seems that key innovations appeared, disappeared, and then had to be invented again during the Middle Stone Age, MSA, Middle Stone Age. Can this really happen? Well, there is a documented recent example of this kind of thing, and that is among the people, the indigenous Tasmanians. Tasmania is an island off the southern coast of Australia. Tasmania became isolated from the mainland about 10,000 years ago. At the end of the last ice age, as the polar caps melted, the sea level rose and cut Tasmania off from the mainland of Australia for 10,000 years. It looks like the Tasmanians forgot or lost the ability to make bone tools, cold weather clothing, fish hooks, hafted tools, fishing spears, spear throws, boomerangs. They didn't have boomerangs in Tasmania. 100 kilometers across the strait on the mainland of Australia, the indigenous Australians had all of this stuff and much more beside. But in Tasmania, the population may have dropped to 1,000 people 10,000 years ago. And that, for whatever reason, they forgot large aspects of their culture. Small, isolated populations are especially at risk. We think this is odd, but can you think of examples of things we've forgotten how to do? There are things the lab used to do real well 40 years ago, but they can't do anymore. I know that for a fact. So here's the mystery of the long cultural stasis. How could culture remain so unchanging or even be forgotten now and then for so long, 250,000 years? And then why did culture finally become cumulative about 50,000 years ago? 50,000 years ago, there were groups then that stopped forgetting. I mean, it could still happen, as the Tasmanians indicate. Something changed 50,000 years ago. So this is the mystery of the long cultural stasis. Now, the third mystery is the mystery of the journey into the cold. Now, I have to tell you a little bit about how we know what the Earth's climate looked like hundreds of thousands, even 1 million years ago. Comes from cores of ice taken out of the polar ice caps and from deep sea cores of sediments drilled up out of the ocean beds around the world. You may have seen this kind of thing. Here is part of an ice core thousands of meters long. They'll drill 3 kilometers down into the Antarctic or Greenland ice cap and pull these cores up out of the ice. And these cores cover nearly 1 million years of the Earth's history. So what's in these cores? Well, the cores preserve a record of the isotopes of hydrogen and oxygen over the last 1 million years, as I say. So the composition of the snow that fell on the ice caps is preserved layer by layer, year by year in these cores. It's the heavy isotope content in rain and snow that we're interested in. And the main point here is that the colder the temperature at which the snow condensed out of the air, the lower the fraction of the heavy isotopes of hydrogen and oxygen. So we're talking here about H1, that's normal hydrogen. H2 is heavy hydrogen or deuterium. O16, oxygen 16 is normal oxygen, and then oxygen 18 is heavy oxygen. And so this is present in the ice, and it is the level of these isotopes is telling us the temperature at which the snow fell. And we see layers year by year. And so we can analyze the isotope fractions throughout history and determine what the climate was doing in the distant past. So let's look at a record here. As I say, we have a record going back almost 1 million years. Here are plots now of isotope fraction, hydrogen isotopes in the upper panel from Antarctica, oxygen isotopes in the lower panel from Greenland. Time is running across the horizontal axis. Today is on the left-hand side. 140,000 years ago is on the right-hand side. So this is just a small fraction of the total million-year record, just the most recent 140,000 years. The vertical axis is not calibrated in terms of temperature. So I've just qualitatively written hot is at the top, cold is at the bottom, okay? Hot at the top, cold at the bottom. What's really being plotted is the isotope fraction, but it could be converted to temperature. So a warm period is when this curve is up high near the top of the plot. So here, like 120,000 years ago, was quite a warm period, and you see these curves are up near the top of the plot. And then about 100,000, 110,000 years ago, it starts to get cold, and it stays cold for a very long time, 100,000 years, until about 10,000 years ago, when it warmed up again. And so we're living now in an interglacial time, just like 120,000 years ago. It's real warm, and all indications are it's going to get warmer, okay, based on anthropogenic climate change. But it was darn cold 20,000 years ago. Now, and of course, the temperature would fluctuate, so you see these curves oscillating a bit, and it fluctuated more in Greenland than it did in Antarctica, probably because the southern hemisphere has so much ocean. You know, the ocean kind of stabilizes the climate. But up here in the northern hemisphere, there were large fluctuations over a period of 1,000 years. You know, like a mini ice age would come and go. So now, paleontology, the fossil record shows us that African fauna and polar fauna, that is the animals of Africa and the animals of polar climates, migrated back and forth as the ice ages come and go in a natural way. In warmer periods, the African fauna migrate north into Southwest Asia. Southwest Asia is what you and I would probably call the Middle East, okay? The Levant, from which we get the term Lebanon, that's Southwest Asia, and the record shows African species migrating up into that part of the world. Whereas during colder periods, during the Ice Age, the African fauna would all migrate back to Africa, of course, because it's warmer down there. So we learned this from the paleontological record. Here, this says the same thing. During the warm interglacial period, 120,000 years ago, the fauna migrated north. So the Arctic fauna, like red deer, wild goats, horses, and Neanderthal's just an Arctic species like deer and horses, moved north into Eurasia. And the African fauna, hartebeest, ibex, warthog, Homo sapiens, us, we're just an African species, we would migrate north into the Levant. And then 70,000 years ago, when it really started to get cold, we all went south again. So the point is, Homo species migrated just like any fauna during this time, until Homo sapiens broke out of that pattern. So here you can see that the climate actually became a bit warmer 60,000 to 50,000 years ago. See this uptick in the record? And apparently this was enough for Homo sapiens to begin moving up into Europe. But then, oops, it got real cold again but Homo sapiens stayed in Europe. So for some reason, Homo sapiens was able to break out of this pattern of behaving just like any other animal species. Here's something else that Homo sapiens did. Homo sapiens also began populating new niches in Africa. West Africa had not been occupied before about 60,000 years ago. This is a plot of archaeological sites all through Africa, and it's color-coded to show you the age of the site. So light colors are long ago, going back to 130,000 years for this light orange. Dark colors are recent, going up to actually only 14,000 years ago for the dark purple. And so if we look at the ages, what we see is that there were no populations leaving archaeological remnants anyway in Western and Central Africa until about 60,000 years ago. So most of the Middle Stone Age, people just didn't live in this part of Africa. But starting 60,000 years ago, they move across this orange line. By 30,000 years ago, they were moving into this purple boundary region. This is, the rainforest, the jungle of Africa. It's not the easiest thing in the world to live there, but Homo sapiens finally figured it out 30,000 years ago. So again, there's this, we should call this not the journey into the cold, but the journey into novel environments. Homo sapiens figured out how to live in places they had never lived before. So that's the mystery of the journey into the cold. Why did Homo sapiens break out of this migration pattern of the other fauna? Why did they expand into more diverse niches within Africa? So let's summarize now. Let's summarize the three mysteries. Something unusual and important happened to Homo sapiens between 70,000 and 40,000 years ago. And I'm going to sort of abbreviate this to 50,000 years plus or minus 20,000 years. There are various sources of uncertainty that make it hard to pin down exactly what happened or exactly when it happened, except in this broad range of time. Homo sapiens was not much different from archaic humans, which is kind of a broad brush term for Neanderthal and Homo erectus and other of those ancient species. But after about 50,000 years ago, Neanderthals and other hominins rapidly go extinct. We don't really know why. Culture became cumulative. Culture just got, I hesitate to say better and better, but it got more and more complex. We start to see 3D sculpture. Here is a three-dimensional carving made out of mammoth ivory of the figure of, I guess, a woman. Yeah, Venus of Hohlefels, it's called. You don't see three-dimensional sculpture in the Middle Stone Age anywhere. You see figurative paintings of animals. You see really good paintings of animals on the walls of caves in Europe. There's indication of perhaps some kind of artistic behavior in the Middle Stone Age, but it's kind of abstract. It's not obviously the picture of anything. It's not figurative. But after 50,000 years ago, which is called the Late Stone Age, LSA, Late Stone Age, we see figurative paintings. Also, weapons become more frequent, more spear points. Neanderthal apparently didn't make a lot of weapons, but Homo sapiens did. And then the third point is that Homo sapiens significantly expanded their range, as I've mentioned. So something happened. Here's another way of saying it, that consistent and exponential patterns of cultural change are seen in the Late Stone Age. That's the words of these authors, Sherry and Will. culture continually becomes more complex. Here is a carving, this is called the Lion Man of Hohenstein-Stadel from 40,000 years ago. It seems to be a human figure, but it has the head of a lion, a cave lion, you know, something like a mountain lion, I guess, in Europe. It's about a foot tall. What made the difference? What happened? Well, there have been many suggestions for what happened. Some people have thought there was a biological change, a mutation, you know, some great jump in cognitive ability of the Homo sapiens. Some people have said a technology change, new tools. Was it bow and arrows? You know, something like that made all the difference. You know, or was it social change? Where larger populations, higher population density, more social connections. Well, there's really no evidence for a mutation. We have genetic data now from fossils, and there's really nothing to support the notion of a biological change, a mutation like this. A technology change, well, new tools did appear, but I think this just backs the question up. Why? Why were there new tools? They don't just appear out of nowhere. Well, what about social change? Would it make any difference? Larger populations, higher population density, more social connections. Well, how would we gain insight into this question? It turns out that genomics, our DNA, contains a record of the population history of humans and, in fact, our predecessors going back millions of years. So genomics can reveal population history over time. So to think about this question of social change and populations, let's look at genomics. So we have to take a detour now into DNA and what we can learn from DNA. So you probably know, and we had our earlier speakers talk about this, Becky Chamberlain and especially talked about the biology, the chemistry of life. Your genome is your complete set of genetic information, and this is stored as DNA molecules in every cell in your body. Genes are segments of your genome that serve as blueprints for your body's materials, the proteins that make up the structure of your body and all the marvelous little microscopic machines that carry out the functions of life within your body. Actually, only about 2% of your genome is genes. The rest of your genome, we're not sure what the function is. Some of it serves a regulatory function. Now, you inherited your genome, of course. Half of your genome came from your mother, half came from your father. You have chromosomes in your cells. Chromosomes are the structures that contain your DNA all wrapped up. You have 23 pairs of chromosomes. One member of each pair came from your mother, the other member came from your father. The Human Genome Project from 1990 to 2003 led to the first sequencing, that is, the first reading of the entire human genome. It's now possible to carry out a sequencing of your or my genome in a few hours for less than $1,000, although that first one took $100 million over 9 months. The DNA of Neanderthals was first read in 2010. You know, it's amazing that DNA can be recovered from a fossil. I mean, a fossil has been turned to stone. Basically, the bones turn into stone and there's nothing organic left, except if the fossil is so 50,000 years, maybe 100,000 years old, you can still get the DNA of the original individual out of the fossil sometimes. Most of the DNA you would get out of a fossil, if you got any, would be microbial DNA. Okay, it would be the DNA of the bugs, the microbes that crawled in and consumed the body after it died. But it is possible, and in fact, the entire genome, all 3 billion letters of the genome of Neanderthals has been read for a few cases, just a few of those fossils. And we've learned very interesting things from Neanderthal DNA. For one thing, 2 to 3% of the genomes of modern European and Asian people comes from Neanderthals. So there was interbreeding between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. On the other hand, Neanderthal genomes have no contribution from modern Homo sapiens that we can tell. I shouldn't say, of course they don't have any from modern Homo sapiens. This is kind of a typo. They don't have any DNA from any Homo sapiens, even the ancient Homo sapiens. Okay, now here's what's crucial for our question of population history. Any genome allows a comparison of two people, the mother and the father of the individual being studied. If we compare similarities and differences between the mother and the father's genomes, we can learn something about population size over time. So let's think about this. This is a little complicated, but we'll think about this. So as I say, population size versus time can be inferred from genetic data. So you compare your mom and your dad's genome. Some segments of those genomes are more alike than others. What's that mean? Well, DNA accumulates differences over time because of mutations. So that's why your mom and your dad's genomes are not identical. Segments of the genome that are very similar between mom and dad show that mom and dad had a recent common ancestor who bequeathed them those segments. Okay, if mom and dad's genomes are really, really similar, that means you're kind of inbred, okay, that they were like members of the same family. But, you know, typically that would not be the case, and so we could say a recent common ancestor might be just 50,000 years ago. On the other hand, segments that are very different between mom and dad show that mom and dad had an ancient common ancestor who bequeathed them those segments, like maybe 1 million years ago. So the point is that analyzing thousands of segments within our very long genome, there are billions of DNA letters in our genome, that reveals the probable number of ancestors as a function of time in the past. Now to do this, you have to make a lot of assumptions. You have to assume something about what the mutation rate was as a function of time that's peppering your genome with those mutations. You have to assume something about the generation time, like how long is a generation from parent to child, 25, 30 years. You have to make an assumption about that. And the mutation rate, for one, is known to be uncertain by a factor of 2. So whenever you see dates, they're often going to be just to within a factor of 2. But anyway, this is how it works. This is the science of population genetics. It's kind of a statistical science. So here is a plot of population history, population size as a function of time. The present is over here on the left-hand side. Long, long ago is on the right-hand side. Now, here at the top is an attempt to calibrate this time scale in actual years, but it's uncertain by a factor of 2. You see that the left-hand side, which I call present in quotes, it's actually from 5 to 10,000 years ago. You see this symbol KYR, that means 1,000 years. K for kilo. KY would be kilo years or 1,000 years. So 5 to 10,000 years ago, here's 50 to 100,000, 0.5 to 1 million, and 5 to 10 million years ago. So it is claimed that there's actual information about ancestors long, 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 long ago. in our DNA. And this has been done. This author, Prüfer et al., who first published the genome of a Neanderthal, actually, also incorporated this plot in her article. This population size axis, I'm just leaving qualitative. The actual numbers depend on what you assume about mutation rate and generation time. But what we see is that, let's go ahead and let's advance this here. This data has been analyzed for a number of present-day human populations. The San, Yoruba, Mandenka, Mbuti people are African populations, tribes in Africa. French, Sardinian are European. Han Chinese people here. So these are all modern humans. They all have, you can tell that they were all the same population until about, perhaps 50 to 100,000 years ago when the dispersions within and out of Africa started to take place. But here are Neanderthal and Denisovans. Denisovans are a rather Neanderthal-like species that have been discovered really from DNA before any substantial fossils. I mean, just a finger bone, actually, was the first discovery of a Denisovan. You can see that the population of Neanderthals and modern human ancestors occurred, 400 to 800,000 years ago. So we see the population of modern humans kind of peaking here and then decreasing on into the present time. So the point I want to make from this now is that all Homo sapiens groups had decreasing populations as the Middle Stone Age was ending. So no matter how you pick your time scale here, if you pick the lower end and call that 50,000, well, here's 100, here's 150. So this would be the last, this would kind of peak in the middle of the Middle Stone Age and then decrease in all groups. The population is going down. By the way, look how small the population was here back about 1 million years ago, maybe 800,000 years ago. Some recent work, in fact, both Chick and Kirk brought this to my attention, that there was apparently a very severe bottleneck for all human ancestors here about 800,000 years ago. The population might have been as small as 1,000 people. So you could make the case that humans have been rescued, quote unquote, numerous times in the history of humans. But anyway, however you choose this time scale, whether you call this 50 or 100,000 years, in which case that's 200, that's 300,000, this peak would occur at the beginning of the Middle Stone Age if you pick 100 for that tick mark. In either case, in all cases, Homo sapiens have decreasing populations during the Middle Stone Age, or at least during the last half of the Middle Stone Age. So we can rule out, I think, on the basis of genetic information, the possibility that larger populations explain the weird thing that happened 50,000 years ago. Higher population density, what does that mean? When you and I think of high population density, maybe we think of urban dwellers, cramming more people into an apartment building or something like that. That's not what's going on with these hunter-gatherers in Africa. Higher population density would have to mean bigger groups living together, more social connections, more people encountering more people, possibly more groups encountering other groups. Now think about the size of a social group. Larger social groups have advantages over smaller social groups. Now this is a result coming from anthropology and sociology. You may agree or disagree personally with this statement, but this is kind of a generalization from a lot of data. Why are large social groups good? Well, there's better protection against calamity. If your tribe is a big tribe, well, it's like having a larger social safety network, okay? And in the event of a typhoon or an earthquake or a famine, there are more people to draw on to help you out. Let's say you have bad hunting luck over a period of time. Well, all human hunter-gatherer tribes today have very strong food sharing norms. You never keep your entire hunt. You always share your food. And that is a very highly developed, strongly embedded social safety net in all hunter-gatherers we know about today, and then very likely was the case at the end of the Middle Stone Age. More hunters give you a more regular food supply because of food sharing. It just smooths out the feast or famine aspect of hunting. Larger social groups is better for communal defense, of course. If you're in a conflict with another social group, it's better to have numbers on your side. Larger bands often prevail in conflict. And then here's the big one, cumulative culture. Larger groups have more division of labor, specialization, and innovation. They are more likely to retain and transmit knowledge. The larger your group, the more likely it is that somebody will be a really, really good spearhead maker and will attract imitators who all sit around and try to imitate making that really, really good spearhead. There probably were not spearhead schools, that's not how it worked, but it's possibly just kind of a hit or miss thing. And if your band is rather small, maybe nobody bothers to really learn how to make a really good spearhead, and then your spearhead maker gets run over by a mammoth. Then what are you going to do? And this kind of thing could be what's going on with the forgetting of culture. That if the groups are too small, you can't retain that cultural knowledge, and then you have to wait tens of thousands of years before somebody reinvents it. So cumulative culture is a big thing here. And then finally, genetic diversity, just less inbreeding, is a better thing for a social group. So large groups are a good thing. But here's the problem. It isn't easy for humans to live together in large groups, especially if they're not closely related. Groups are always unstable. This is a result from anthropology and sociology. There's always something to cause trouble, and generally it will be marriage, adultery, or sorcery. Now, I probably don't have to explain the first two items to you. Sorcery, witchcraft, is a big issue in simple societies. Would it help if I compared it to conspiracy theories? In a small society, if something unusual happens, say somebody gets stung by a poisonous snake. See, that doesn't happen all that often, really. But in your tribe, somebody gets stung by a poisonous snake. Why did that happen? We need an explanation for why that happened. And if there's somebody over there on the other side of your tribe who you don't know very well and you don't like very much for some historical reason, maybe they're a sorcerer and they caused that to happen. So this is a very prevalent issue in simple societies around the world today, and we can speculate was also the case back during the late Stone Age and all throughout human history, in fact. So there's always something to break up your group, and many other things. Any form of social cheating, okay, where I shared my food with you, but you didn't share your food with me. That'll lead to a breakup. Or I helped you in your battle with the village next door. You didn't help me when I got in trouble with those other folks. That kind of perceived cheating will lead to the breakup of a group. Now, anthropologists tell us that there seems to be a limit of about 150 adults who can live together in a stable group. This number is called Dunbar's number. Robin Dunbar is an anthropologist who actually correlated data for primates. Primates includes chimpanzees, gorillas, and gibbons, and a large number of species, and of course also Homo sapiens. He correlated brain volume with the typical social group size. And he found that, the bigger the brain, the more individuals can live together in a group. Why is that? It's because it takes some brain power to get to know everybody in your group and to know their personality and what they're likely to do in any given circumstance. And so he determined this correlation for primates, and so then he predicted for humans, based on brain volume, that humans are sort of evolved to live in groups of 150 adults. And it turns out, from anthropology, you look around the world today, and that's kind of what you see in very simple societies around the world. Well, how can humans get across that barrier of 150 people? Because we have today, we live in enormous cities. I'm not saying everybody in New York City is all lovey-dovey, but to have that kind of population density takes an incredible extrapolation beyond this limit of 150 adults. Well, we need some kind of social glue that could glue together groups larger than 150. Now, Emil Durkheim was one of the founders of the science of sociology, whom you heard about from John Ambrosiano a few weeks ago. John invoked Emil Durkheim along with William James in a discussion of religion and spirituality. That is, the subjective experience of religion. But I'm going to invoke Durkheim in the sociological aspect of religion. And Durkheim said there are two kinds of social glue. For small egalitarian societies, that is, the simple cultures that we're talking about in the late Stone Age, it is the common beliefs, the norms, the morals of that group that bind them together. Food sharing norms, that powerfully binds together a group. In large complex societies like Durkheim lived in and that we live in, our independence is based more on division of labor. You depend on those people who put food on the shelves in the grocery store, don't you? You depend on the people who deliver that food to the grocery store, and you don't even know who they are. But you depend on them. That's division of labor. Durkheim worried about that kind of culture because there's fragmentation. We don't know those people we depend on. But in simple societies, you know those people, and you are bound to them by your common beliefs. Now, I'm going to put in a shameless plug for the talk I gave last year on ritual religion and the scaling up of society, the way religion allows groups to bond together and scale up. You and I might think of religion as something for arguing about and fighting over, but anthropologists and sociologists tell us differently, that religion has this function of a social glue. So my talk last year, it's on the website, it's on the Faith and Science website. You can download my slides or watch the video. So that's all I'll say about that. But it's not all. I will summarize last year's talk very rapidly by telling you about this one example we have from modern anthropology about the village of Ilahita in Papua New Guinea that gives us an example, a recent example of group growth via religion. This is in remote Papua New Guinea in the mid-20th century. Villages rarely exceeded 300 people. That is, 150 adults. There's that number, Dunbar's number. There would be 4 or 5 patrilineal clans. A clan would be a group of people who would trace their ancestry back to a great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather maybe. But there was one exception, the village of Ilahita. It was about 10 times bigger, had a population of over 2,500 people with almost 40 clans. And so, anthropologists went to live there, to find out what was going on, and they discovered that Ilahita had an extremely elaborate ritual or religious practice called the Tambaran cult. Ilahita was similar to the other villages in many outward ways. But what happened was that they had been defeated in a war with a rival village probably 100 years before, the mid-19th century. And so Ilahita had imported their rival's religion on top of their own existing religion. The religion in the rival village was a little bit different from their own religion, so it was kind of easy to bring it in. Now their religion was kind of complicated. It involved a number of initiation rites that were painful and frightening, frankly. And the rites had to be carried out by various ritual groups. The ritual groups cut across all the clans. Those groups, I don't know, think of the Army and Navy, okay? The Army and the Navy in the United States bring together people from all different kinds of groups. It's a way of gathering, creating a socially constructed community. Well, anyway, so you had layer after layer, actually, I think there were 8 layers of ritual groups, all of which cut across all the clans, so they were binding all the clans together. Frankly, the Tambaran cult was a little demonic, if you ask me. The Tambaran were a group of spirits that didn't care about humans at all, but you had to carry out these rituals exactly right or you would offend the Tambaran. So that's how the Tambaran worked. So this is socially constructed interdependence. All the clans were needed. They were required for properly carrying out the rituals. Otherwise you would offend the Tambaran. So this is an example of how ritual and religious relationships, not political conquest, allowed Ilahita to scale up. They also benefited from migration. People in other villages would say, hey, Ilahita's got something going on there. I don't know what it is, but let's go join in. So Ilahita shows that religious practice can allow a community to bind together and scale up to larger size. Can we think of other examples? Well, the Bushmen of the Kalahari, the Juhoansi, have something called a trance dance. It's a communal dance ritual. When the elders of the tribe sense that there's too much conflict and disagreement and grumbling going on in the tribe, they say, okay, it's time for a trance dance. And they'll get everybody together, and that dance will banish troublesome spirits and heal social wounds. And it really works. There are similar rituals in most small-scale societies. How about the survival of the Jews as a distinct ethnic group? Small and persecuted throughout history. Can we say that they have been preserved and bound together by their religious tradition? How about European culture being sustained by the church after the collapse of the Roman Empire? You know, after the Roman Empire collapsed, Europe just was politically fragmented and remained politically fragmented for 1,500 years, and until the European Union, I guess, after World War II. But the church, Christianity, provided a common language and common norms all across Europe, so that somebody from Ireland could go over to Poland and they could all study together and invent astronomy, stuff like that, or invent the heliocentric theory. Well, so let's go back now. Can we say that Homo sapiens was rescued from extinction? I want you to remember what our recent speaker, Jim Stump, thinks about reconciling two statements like this. Number one, evolution is the best scientific explanation for the origin of Homo sapiens. Number two, God intentionally created human beings to be divine image bearers. Are these statements in conflict? Stump says, no, not necessarily. He has various ways, strategies for reconciling statements like that, but his favorite method, I believe, is and I've taken his slide here, you may recognize it, is the epistemological strategy, which says that those two statements are different ways of saying the same thing. They are based on different levels of explanation. And I think I like his example. My favorite example of his is the boiling tea kettles. Why is the tea kettle boiling? Is it boiling because the flame has increased the thermal motion of the molecules, and if the molecules are moving fast enough, they will start to move into the vapor phase? Is that why the tea kettle is boiling? Or is the tea kettle boiling because my Aunt Tilly is coming for tea this afternoon? I want to make tea for her. Those are two different levels of explanation. And Stump says that's the way we have to look at those two ways of saying things. So let's look at these statements. Should we say a series of events allowed Homo sapiens to develop cumulative culture, increase population, and expand to fill almost every niche on planet Earth? Or should we say that God rescued Homo sapiens from extinction? Maybe another way to phrase this dichotomy is to say the first statement is a statement about mechanism, about how things happened. The second statement is a statement about meaning, about why something happened. What does it mean? And this distinction is discussed very nicely in this book by Jonathan Sachs, The Great Partnership, God, Science, and the Search for Meaning. I think in the example of human origins that I've just now gone through with you, we can tie these levels together more because it looks like, or I'm going to propose this hypothesis, that what happened is that Homo sapiens became conscious of certain supernatural obligations. Conscious, as if from the mind of Brahma, okay? Or because the image of God took shape in Homo sapiens. That Homo sapiens realized there's more going on than just, hunting and gathering and living from day to day. That is, God breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, the neshama, this breath of God. And this then would lead to Homo sapiens forming larger social groups because of a ritual religious practice born out of this new consciousness of Homo sapiens. So that's the hypothesis here. So mechanism and meaning could be tightly bound together in this way. Not just separate ways of understanding, but actually really saying the same thing. So that's the hypothesis, that it wasn't new tools, it wasn't a mutation, but it was a new cultural practice. Why? Well, here's where we're all on our own. Perhaps God whispered into the brain of that first Homo sapiens. Who knows? That remains for further explanation. So here are the questions for discussion. I've put them on the table. Many questions that I hope have been stimulated here. And with that seems to be the end of the story. I thought there was another slide that says, "Thank you for your attention."
So before we break into discussion groups, I wanted to mention who the speaker for next week will be, and that will be Dr. John Loike, MD, who will talk on faith, science, and biotechnologies, navigating science with integrity. He comes is our guest speaker from the East Coast, and his presentation will actually be on Monday next week instead of Tuesday. So I wanted to let you know that. And then it'd be great to have a facilitator at each table. That would be like a board member, so everybody gets a chance to talk. And also, I'd like to remind the board to be part of the cleanup crew. Thank you much.
Harry.
No, that was an extremely nice talk. Thank you. Good job. When you showed of early fossil samples that we had.
Thank you. As I've looked at archaeological research, one of the things that really has struck me is the paucity, the sparseness of the ancient record. An example of that would be that Genghis Khan and Tamerlane essentially controlled Eurasia for a significant period of time. There is no archaeological evidence of that. Only the written records of those that they impacted tell that they were there, and the genome, because they were very free with sharing their genetic material. And so when we look at archaeological samples, they're really a very small fraction of all that were there. So this handful that we have of hominids, Neanderthals, and so on, if we consider that maybe they are one of hundreds of groups, is there a way for us to understand that?
Well, you know, I think a good example of surprises would be the Denisovans. That's a species that was completely unknown until 2010 or 2008, when this little finger bone from Denisova cave in Siberia was analyzed, and it was realized, hey, this DNA is different from Neanderthal DNA. This is a species we had no idea about heretofore. And since then, actually, more Denisovan fossils have been discovered. But that could happen, yeah. I mean, who's to say that we won't discover many more species? So, yeah, exactly. We can't prove that, well, and we certainly don't have a complete record of the past. So we're dealing with this incomplete record. Joyce.
Can you remind me when language first developed, or do we know the answer? Do we know the answer to when language first developed? Not written language, but spoken language. Would that have coincided with the development of these larger groups?
That's hard to tell, of course. Language doesn't fossilize, but people speculate that the use of symbols, language is symbolic communication. The sounds we make are symbols of the things we want to refer to. So the hope would be that if we find material symbols in the archaeological record, that might be associated with the occurrence of language. There are symbols, apparently. Well, let's see. You know those seashells that people strung on strings, presumably, to make necklaces? Those seem to be symbols, and those are found throughout the Middle Stone Age. So perhaps there was language during the Middle Stone Age. This explosive growth of hominin brain size, okay, what was driving that? One idea was that it was the increasing elaboration of language, that you do need a lot of neural processing power to handle language. And the benefit of language, there are many benefits of language as regards social organization and learning, and mentalizing. I mean, I can make a theory about what's going on in your head, but if you can tell me what's going on in your head, now we really know what's going on. So language has all these valuable functions. And so maybe that's what's going on with the increase of hominin brain size. But it's hard to know exactly.
Thank you.
Chick.
To go back to the fact that we don't have a lot of information about anything, that's nice to say, but if you looked at for instance, your plot of brain size, it's unlikely that in some funny way we're going to find a huge brain size 3 million years ago. We have enough information to know that brain size increased. And that's the same for a lot of things. Now, we have things that we don't quite know, but there's an awful lot that we really do.
That's right. I can't back up slides, Kirk. If you could help me back up the slides, I would appreciate that. But yeah, there are some gaps in that cranial volume versus time plot. Okay, thank you. I'll do this. But they're not very big. And so there it is. I was thinking, yeah, if I expanded this scale, you would see that there's kind of a gap between 800,000 and maybe 500,000 years ago. It'd be nice to fill that in, but it's unlikely it would show us anything real different because there's a lot of scatter for one thing. So yeah, so this looks like it looks like a pretty complete record. It'd be nice to get more samples. But Sheila.
Just a sec. Oh, where? Oh, yeah.
Humans came out of Africa? We know humans came out of Africa. That's basically what you said and other things I've read.
Yeah.
So the map you showed us of Africa had scattered sites. I guess, do we know what part of northern or eastern Africa they came from? Or was it all those areas in Africa? Because it wasn't in the area that you showed us. So do we have a central place or area where it says 60?
Well,
It'd be
I
way
think
before
if
that, too.
If you look along this southeastern up to northwestern edge of Africa, I think it's all kind of uniformly populated, as if groups were moving all around there.
Okay, thanks.
But on the other hand, I would say it's unlikely. Let's say this hypothesis of religious and ritual origin is the explanation. It's unlikely that that happened everywhere at once. It seems like it would happen someplace first, and then it would catch on or spread in any of a number of ways.
Yeah, let's have one or two more questions and then go into discussion.
Well, my question is kind of strange. So according to 23andMe, I actually have Neanderthal DNA.
Mm-hmm.
So
You're European, yeah.
you could almost say that Neanderthals didn't die out, they just were absorbed into other things. My question is really related to all these other species. I mean, was there, I don't know the word, cross?
Interbreeding.
Yes, was there
Interbreeding,
interbreeding? Is there any evidence of interbreeding between all these other species all these years?
Yeah, Denisovans and Neanderthal interbred for sure. And there's evidence that some other population, maybe Homo heidelbergensis, interbred with Neanderthal, I think. If you look at your entire family tree, just imagine, your parents, your grandparents, your great-great-grandparents, that tree spreads way out. How many of those people are Neanderthal? Very small fraction. So you wouldn't say Neanderthal didn't die out. Some of you have Native American ancestry, but it would be wrong to say that you're Native American, and a lot of people would object, unless you have a fraction higher than a certain amount, you cannot be a tribal member.
I do agree with that, but
So
my point was all of these things sort of,
I'm afraid we have to say that Neanderthal went extinct. We don't have a smoking gun. We don't have a bloody spear. But I think the fingerprints on the bloody spear, would probably be Homo sapiens. But it might just be that, you saw Neanderthal populations were diminishing rather steadily. It might just be Neanderthal was trying to live in a very difficult climate, Northern Europe, during the ice ages. It might just be that life got to be too hard. And then when the Homo sapiens showed up and started killing all the deer and the other animals, Neanderthal just was not able to survive. And it had nothing to do with conflict between Homo sapiens and Neanderthal, possibly. I'm trying to exonerate us.
During that time when there was like 6 hominins at the same time wandering around, was there any evidence in their tools they were making tools of war, or did they get along, or were they so far apart it didn't matter?
You know, I mentioned that the weapons, and weapons would be used for hunting primarily. The number of weapons really increased after about 50,000 years ago. So I would say there are probably fewer weapons being made during the Middle Stone Age and prior to that. Let's see. What else did you ask? It was were these
Well,
groups?
were they so-
when there were 6 groups, were they in conflict? Were they?
I mean, how many were they? Did they have to get along together, or could they live apart?
Here's what I was going to say. It seems as if Neanderthal learned some tool technology from Homo sapiens. So Neanderthal had a particular style of making tools, but right there, about 50,000, 40,000 years ago, as Homo sapiens are coming into Europe, it seems as if Neanderthal picked up some of the new tool-making technology from Homo sapiens. And you know, how do you know? You have to find the tools together with the bones. And if the tools and bones are in the same stratum, you say, well, that's who made these tools. So that there is evidence then that Neanderthal might have been picking up how to make those better tools.
Homo sapiens are very good at making weapons of war.
Yeah, apparently. Yeah. Okay, we got it.
Where's it going?
So here we are, 8 billion plus people. Did God breathe enough life into Homo sapiens, or are we just going to keep doubling until we know so much of the earth is going to crash?
Well, you know, human population is likely to peak in about 2060, last I saw.
That's another doubling at least.
I read this article today that said the United Nations had predicted human population will peak in 2090, but that's extremely optimistic. It's more like the peak will occur in 2055, and then we'll be going down. You know, population is crashing all around the world, and it's crashing in societies that have not made the demographic transition to urban life yet. Living in cities causes the birth rate to decline. And there are nations around the world where the population has not yet moved into the cities, but the birth rate's already going down. So how long will Homo sapiens be around? Well, I don't know. You know, how lucky are you feeling? You know, it's like every other species went extinct. What are the odds that we're going to make it? Well, I tried to show evidence tonight that we have been rescued, perhaps on more than one occasion. Let's try not to upset God so much that he decides he's done with it. Anyway.
Great. On that note, let's break into our discussion groups. Thank you.